afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this scientific session on mining and sustainability. Today, we have 6 interesting speakers, and we're going to go through their presentations, ask them questions, put them over the coals, and really figure out if they know what mining and sustainability really mean. I know I just spooked one of our speakers. He's like, "What? This is not my PhD defense." But hey, we'll prepare you for that if you're ever going to go down that right. You are not here to listen to me. I'm just the gatekeeper and the timekeeper. So let's get on with our session. Um, we're going to start in batches of 3. Our first 3 speakers are Patrick, Herman, and Webke. There's Patrick, there's Herman, and there's Webke. They'll be talking about interesting stuff. 8 minutes. If you have clarifying questions, we can ask them right after their presentations, but let's save a number of the questions and the comments for the 15 minutes that we have for discussion. And on that lovely note, stay for the other session as well. I'm just going to give it over to Patrick, who's why we're here.
Thank you. So my name is Patrick, and I'm here from the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, together with my colleague Tomáš Arpiševský, who is sitting in the back. So our talk is entitled Sourcing Responsible Gold, Spatial Data Science for Systematic ESG Assessment of Gold Mines. Now, I'll keep the introduction really very short. We have, or I should say Tomáš has, spoken with many representatives from the sourcing industry, also especially mining. And we heard time after time that there's a high demand of data-driven ESG assessment in the industry. At the same time, we often also heard that there's a general lack of evidence-based systematic approaches of exactly doing that, ESG assessment in the industry. For instance, on important environmental factors as deforestation, water, or biodiversity. Now, what we'll presenting in the next few minutes is an idea, is a concept, is an approach, how this could be done evidence-based, data-based. Now, we were lucky enough to get funding from the Swiss Science Foundation, SNF, for a 4-year project to do research on developing the scientific foundations of doing these types of assessments. And our core idea is actually very simple. So we take geospatial data that's out there on said properties, so deforestation, water, scarcity, and biodiversity, and then try to link that with asset level data. Now, how will we do that? I don't know how many of you are data experts. Some of you may be, others perhaps not. So I explain the basic idea in very simple terms. So let's assume we have a spatial data set about biodiversity risk that comes as a raster. Like every pixel has a value given a certain risk. At the same time, we need information about our assets. Where are our companies active in space? So if we consider the mining sector, this could be locations of mines. Now we need to know where in space are they active. Typically, such a mine location comes as a pair of coordinates, but we all know that there's more to this. So we start off with just investigating the pixel underneath that location, but we could also do more, and that illustrates where it starts to get interesting. So if you, for instance, have spatial extents of said mines, we could do more clever data science. Now, that brings me to the next point. So now we need to integrate those two sources. And what has been done, what we've seen from competitors and other solutions in the area, is that you use a circle and neighborhood, like a buffer, where you, for instance, then can integrate the biodiversity risk in that neighborhood. If you do that for all your mines, you can come up with ESG ratings for those mines. Now, perhaps you need to adjust the size of these buffers because you have a big mine, compare it with a small mine, and that already illustrates you where the spatial data science could come in. How would you do that? It's not clear. You can start off with a 10-kilometer buffer, but perhaps that's not meaningful. So there comes in the spatial data science. How would you do that? And that is what we're investigating in our research project. Now, to illustrate the basic idea, we took publicly available data on mine locations and deforestation and biodiversity risk, and built a dashboard that can illustrate this idea. Now, So first, whoops, that was the wrong direction. So let me start again. Forwards. Okay, so in the map view, we, for instance, zoom into one country and have a look at some locations of mines. Then we add some environmental data. So for instance, we have data sets about forest loss, deforestation. So we add that information, zoom in and start to investigate, well, what's going on around those mines? We add these buffers, as we've just shown before, and can now start to quantify within these buffers what has been going on in terms of deforestation in the last 5 years or in the last 20 years. And we also have different buffer sizes. Perhaps the neighborhood is depending on some important properties of our mines. As a second data set, we take biodiversity risk. We have classified this in a very simple approach into 3 categories, like low, medium, high, to keep it simple, and then quantify what's the ratios of these 3 classes, again, within the neighborhoods. Now you see an example where you have quite a lot of red, which could give you an indication that perhaps these mines are in an area where the biodiversity risk is high. Obviously, you can start using filters. So you, for instance, choose a certain commodity, which could be gold. You can also perhaps select a portfolio that you know of, and then you can get an illustration of the aggregated indications of these variables per portfolio. Clearly, you can also zoom in. Well, that brings me to the concluding. Well, there was just one thing. You can click on one mine and get a lot of attributes. You can imagine how that works. Now, lessons learned so far. We've seen that some related approaches use the simple buffer. We started with that as well, but we already see the limits of it. So just using simple buffers is perhaps too simple. Just using points is also too simple. So if we have extents of mines, this is a much better starting point because we can do more in terms of spatial data science. For the obvious questions about upstream and downstream impacts, we include life cycle assessment in our approach. So a colleague of mine had a talk in the said session earlier in the morning. But we've also learned so far when we started to show our solutions to decision makers that they were very quickly, I wouldn't say overwhelmed by the complexity, but they were not that interested. So they need very simple decision tools. So we have to really reduce the complexity and boil it down perhaps to like these ample colors like yellow, red, and green. But the most important thing, which we believe in is a strength of our approach, is that we can scale up globally. What we do here is perhaps you could call it a bit shallow because there's many, many different impacts that we perhaps can't measure. But what we can do is scale it globally so we can really upscale it to a large number of mines. When I said we, I really mean we. So we're a big team from different universities. We have colleagues from the University of Zurich that are specialists in the remote sensing part. And then we have the finance experts, Tomáš, and the geoinformatics experts that I represent. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
I should say who's funded that work. So that is the Swiss National Science Foundation, and InnoSwiss and DITS. So
excellent. Do we have clarifying questions for Patrick? We'll cross question the idea he's putting up, but anything that wasn't clear. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Can you say where you have the data from? Yes, I was a bit sloppy there. I should have added a reference. This is published data from Maus et al. And Jasanski et al. These are 2 data sets that are often used from, what is it? Science data, I think. But if I could send you the link. So it's published data that's openly accessible.
And is this data coverage good at a global level, or are they doing LSM? Is it specific to medium and large scaled mines only?
Yes.
Okay.
The data set illustrates what's possible, but there clearly comes the huge challenge. So how detailed is it? How many mines are included? We use it because it's open and it helps us illustrating the concept.
Right.
But clearly there are limits. I think it's at the moment, in terms of mines, it's about 2,000, 3,000 mines worldwide.
Right.
They do have a lot of attributes, but the number of mines is limited.
One final question from my side. When you said policy and you said decision makers. Who are we talking? Policy setters? Are we talking finance? Are we talking who's the decision maker that you have in mind, or
different types?
Different types.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much for that,
Welcome.
Patrick. We have Herman Cornelson, who is up next. He's going to be talking about the Africa Mining Vision of the Africa Mineral Program and views on policy alignment to encourage the recycling of mineral waste. And if you just click on next, that should be your title slide.
Where do I point when I click next?
This is Switzerland. You can point in any direction.
Absolutely everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Herman Cornelissen. I'm here from DMT in Randburg. Our company is based in Germany, but I'm from the Johannesburg office. The topic of what I'm going to share with you today is about the African Mining Vision specifically and the Africa Mineral Program. There are many touch points between those two programs. And what we tried to do, or what was a question of interest, was whether the one actually creates an enabling space for the other. So the few slides I have to share with you today is really just exploring that question and seeing how far we can go down the line. So I do think that we have a bit of a duplicate slide there. Never mind, we'll just move on. So in terms of content, we're looking at the African Mining Vision. I'll spend a bit of time on that. And then an overview of the Africa Mineral Program, with whom I believe many of you are familiar with by now. And also then looking at challenges and constraints to implementing the African Mining Vision, of which there are several perspectives on. And then whether these two will be able to dovetail in the end of the day, whether we'll be able to make the one work within the context of the other. And I think a presentation of this nature would not be complete if we don't spend a little bit of time speaking about Africa's alignment with BRICS, or major African countries, African mining destinations specifically, and their alignment in the global geopolitical framework with BRICS. So without further ado, let's move on. The African Mining Vision, in broad summary, is a framework for sustainable mining in Africa. It was adopted by the African Union in 2009, and it creates a space in which you can transform the intention is to transform the African mining landscape to a more sustainable future. So it emphasizes value addition, transparency, and community engagement. And it has several themes with which you'll be familiar. If you work in the sustainability space, none of these should be foreign concepts to you. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it speaks about holistic development and about beneficiation, transparency, and accountability. And really, I'm not going to read all of that. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a keen understanding in Africa of what there's alignment on a broad level of what the ultimate goal is. Africa understands full well what is meant with sustainable development, and there may be a particular African flavor to it and a different path to reach what we believe is sustainable development. But the point is that the concept is fully understood, and it's underwritten by policies that are sort of homegrown in Africa. So we know where we're going. How we get there, we'll get to that. And when it comes to reuse or the recycling of mineral wastes, it is an aspect that gets quite a lot of attention within the Africa Mineral Program. And the question was whether this is supported in the African Mining Vision. If the African Mining Vision is what's going to drive the political thinking and the collective political thinking in Africa going forward, then surely you'd want to see, if we're going to make inroads with the Africa Mineral Program specifically, you're going to want to see alignment there. And there is some alignment, certainly. The Africa Mining Vision speaks about resource efficiency, mineral beneficiation, environmental considerations, research and innovation. There are quite a few policy initiatives within the African Mining Vision that support responsible custodianship of mineral resources into the nth generation of that resource. So again, I wouldn't spend too much time reading all of that. I'll keep you here all day. There are, of course, challenges to implementing the African mining vision, and we're not blind to those. Some of them include resource dependency. Many of these African countries are still deeply dependent on their resources. And unfortunately, it drives policy and public debate on a local level, that resource dependency. There's a lack of infrastructure, limited technical capacity, weak regulatory frameworks. And the list goes on. There's quite a number of them, and I'm not here to be the bearer of bad news. There is a manner in which you can breach that and move forward. And that's going to be through tailored approaches, understanding that not every African country's mineral policy is perfectly aligned with what we may or may not want. International support is going to be required in many of those countries. Capacity building is going to be extremely important. And of course, regional cooperation. And there are various perspectives. If you don't need to take my word for it, there are various reports and by international organizations that speak about these challenges for the implementation of the African mining vision. And it's taken quite a bit of criticism for that. There's been the Oxfam report on the African mining vision of 2017, Africa's Development Dynamics 2022. Just this year, last year, the African Union Development Agency also issued a report noting the challenges or the progress that's been made, but also the challenges that persist in Africa. And then finally, there's the I wouldn't call it the little book of horrors, but certainly the book of keenly interesting things. The Fraser Institute's annual mining survey, where they take a look at the global big thinkers in mining and ask their opinions on investment destinations for mining and exploration funding. And again, Africa presents a very mixed bag. You have quite a number of African countries at the very bottom of that, and yet Botswana number 2, right below Vancouver. It hardly gets better than that. So the links are in there, and you're welcome. I'm sure that the presentation will be shared, and you'll have access to that. So let's look at Africa Maval very briefly. The Africa Maval program is an outflow of the EU's Green Deal, and the transition focuses on critical raw minerals and to build EU and African partnerships for responsible sourcing of those minerals. There are a few points there about the alignment. The Africa Maval program does try and align with the African mining vision, of course, and also with the EU's raw material initiative. In the very first stages, I think there was talk of aligning to the African mining partnership, but that, of course, has been superseded by the African mining vision. The key points of the program, of course, are geological data collection, analysis of these African value chains, and ESG aligned mining practices, focusing on artisanal small scale mining, and also looking at illegal supply chains, the impact of this program. We can go through that and spend a bit more time. If you're interested, speak with any of the Africa Maval people or visit our desk upstairs. So the question now becomes whether we can integrate these two, whether there's the one creates the space. If this is the way that Africa thinks about the future of our mineral development, and this is what the EU wants out of Africa in terms of responsibly sourced minerals, do they dovetail? Are we going to be able to make this work? And yes, there are synergies between these two. In the first place, sustainable mining practices. Both of these, the research program and the policy framework itself, speak about responsible mining practice or sustainable mining practice. It also endorses regional cooperation. Transparency and governance is a very big touch point for both of them. And then infrastructure development, as we know, we have several instances, even in the country where I'm from, and South Africa's very well-developed mining destination. You have large mineral reserves which are potentially at risk for poorly developed infrastructure. Renewable energy is a joint focus, as is economic development and international engagement. 1 minute. Good heavens, I'm going to have to dash. There are constraints. But in the integration between Africa Maval and the African mining partners, the African mining vision, of course, they have different geographic focus, regulatory differences, infrastructure developed, different environmental standards. So quite a bit of things that where there's not necessarily immediately alignment because they have different foci. And these are the things that I would highly recommend you find someone local to try and help you work through those challenges and for your particular project. I need to spend a few seconds on BRICS. Africa is finding itself in a position where it is South Africa at least has started, and now we see other countries. And there's a tiny little map there from Visual Capitalist that actually indicates the countries in Africa that have shown their interest to join BRICS, and that list is growing. So we find geopolitically that Africa is aligning itself almost a little bit away from the traditional Western-dominated world and the dollar-denominated economy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time speaking about that. Please take your time and read through that. Let's get to the summary, seeing as I have bare seconds left. In summary, then, by a great fortune of geology, Africa is currently a major is blessed with the minerals that are going to drive this energy transition, at least with the technology that we have now. That may all change in the future, but for now, that is the reality that we're dealing with. And we're well aware of the ultimate goal of sustainability and responsible resource extraction. The path of getting there may differ slightly. The color is quite poor, but the third point says there are new ways of thinking are required to successfully engage these African countries in the sustainable future supply chain of critical minerals. Africa Maval is not the only program that aims to meet the global needs for critical minerals. Japan has a similar one, Korea has a similar one, the USA has one, Canada has one, and Australia has one. Those are the ones that I'm aware of just for the moment. And geopolitically, Africa's new alignment with BRICS leads it away from those traditional Western-dominated economies. And the final point, I think for the first time ever, and what I'd like to close with, for the first time ever, Africa has options and it's determining its own future. Being aware it is of what that sustainable end may be, it may choose a different path to get there. I thank you very much for your time and attention. And I made it on time, right?
Just one just because you've got such a lovely sort of I love a good South African accent. I will not apologize. I love a good African accent as well. Questions for Herman, clarifying questions. Because he has tried to crunch two very large policy pieces into 10 slides, which is well done on your part. Oh. All right, we'll leave the question about power dynamics for our discussion. Thank you, Ahmed. Right, that means Webke, you're up next, and you're going to be talking about non-metallic mineral-based value creation in Mauritania and Senegal and impacts of local capacity building. And if you just click next on that ticker, you should be onto your slide.
Okay. Let me find my... Right. Yeah, we've heard a lot about, for the last almost 24 hours, we heard a lot about critical minerals, and that is mainly metals. And now I like to move us to a different world, which is non-metallic mineral-based value chains. I report about a project that is being carried out by BGR in collaboration with the Mauritanian Mining Authority, in short, ANAPAM. You see their head office there. BGR's office is also located right in that building. And that is the way how BGR operates. BGR is something like, you can maybe call it German's geological survey. And we carry out international collaboration projects in behalf of the Ministry of International Cooperation in Germany. And so the work we do mainly, it is capacity building, and that is why we collaborate very tightly with local administrators and partners in the GOC. The project I report about is led by Omar Jadlawi, who tried to join online, but unfortunately he can't, he's not there. I may speak for him, so I hope the questions won't be too detailed. My name is Wiebke Krevert. I'm the leader of a policy advisory group at BGR. We advise the ministry in terms of all issues related with raw materials. Ministry for International Cooperation, Germany, BMZ. Why that project? Mauritania is, as many countries, highly dependent on extractive metal mining, and that is mainly copper, gold, and iron. This, of course, impacts the local economy. The national GDP has mainly suffered from price drops and volatile markets. So why not talk about other other natural resources. And in this case, it's kaolin. Kaolin, an aggregate, an industrial mineral that has quite some economic potential. Kaolin is, for some historic reasons, not very much mined in Africa. If you compare it to other continents, then Africa is lagging very much behind. However, kaolin has quite some economic worth. For example, in Germany, the ceramic industry employs 35,000 employees and has a turnover of roughly 6 billion euros just for ceramics, Chinaware, ceramic building materials, sanitary ceramics, and so on. And kaolin is also important in the glass industry and in the paper industry. Sorry for those pictures. This is pictures from open pit mining of kaolin in Germany. I use those because I wanted to rely on our own data sources, and we in our database we didn't have other pictures, for example, from African kaolin pit mining, open pit mining. But the system is generally the same. It's open, usually open pit. The project I like to talk about is a collaboration on the creation of a kaolin value chain, and it is for quite some years that we cooperate with our Mauritanian partners, and the work was mainly on exploration, because those kaolin deposits it was thought they were there, but it was not really clear. We did not have any inferred and really proven occurrences. And here BGR partnered with ENAPAM in order to collect geoscientific data, explore the deposit, analyze it, and in the end produce geodata. This is something BGR does quite frequently, that we support our partners in publication of information, because this is something that is often missing in partner administrations, that there is not enough substantial knowledge about the wealth of the resources, and so there is not so much opportunity for investors to really step in. Here you see examples, and that is, for example, something like this here. Oh, no, wow. So this is a database we can access online in order to explore what is actually the minerals that are there, and for which you can apply for licenses for mining and mining. There was also other promotions of this kaolin deposit. The work that was being done showed that there was an extremely valuable kaolin deposit in Mauritania. It is rather big. It has a very, very high degree of purity. It is 86% purity, 80 million tons, and is by that one of top quality deposit here, and absolutely worth exploring. And that is why that promotion work was actually being undertaken. The result of this work is the creation of a value chain between a Mauritanian company and a Senegalese company. In 2021, a Mauritanian company gained the mining license for that deposit, and they had already established contact with a Senegalese company in order to really process the kaolin. So what we have is a regional value chain, not domestic in that way, but also working with other already existing economic partners. So this is a local value chain, which is until here the Mauritanian company, and then the processing is going to take place in Senegal. The deposit itself is located not too far from the border to Senegal, so that it is possible to transport. So we have 3 enabling key business conditions, or let's call it classes of conditions, that supported this value chain. We have transport infrastructure, at least until 45 kilometers away from the deposit. We have business owners, business managers, and business knowledge there in Senegal and in Mauritania. There is political and regulatory stability, in a sense that contracts are worth something between the trade partners in the different countries. There is machinery, car industry, digital services, communication systems, laboratory services, energy, and workforce available. And we have a market which is already accessed by the Senegalese company, a market of a considerable size, of which is not too far away and accessible at specific cost and not too volatile. The two companies intend to invest quite a lot in those in that deposit. We are expected to have 300 employees working in Mauritania, and the company in Senegal, which now turns out to be one of the major investment projects in Senegal, is about to have 1,000 workers directly in the factory and around 3,000 indirect jobs around it. It's a big company, of course, not only sourcing from Mauritania. And due to the size of the contract, which is about 100,000 tons a year, Mauritania will become most likely the third biggest kaolin producer in Africa. Right now, it is Australia. It is Egypt. But what is the impact? Here, this is the picture of this one of the largest German kaolin mines. You see, kaolin is apparently not highly toxic in mining. So it's open pit mining, but you don't use usually chemicals. So it's mainly mechanical mining. And what is the socioeconomic impact? We don't know. Even though the mining license was granted, there were no sound either assessments of the environmental impact or of the socioeconomic impact. In gray, you see a tiny village which is located not far, about 3 kilometers away from the mine. The mine is, or the mine site is where the red dot is. And we don't know what is going to happen to these people, and there was no assessment. Most likely, the area around it is pasture land. We are in a summit area where we, of course, have pasture use of that area, and we know that open pit mining requires a lot of land. We don't know how this is going to impact the local community. So, is local value creation really responsible value? Is it really a responsible value chain? And I just mentioned it. There are some problems. Mauritania has a mining regulation which has considerable gaps in social, environmental, and governance standards. This is based on a detailed in-depth study of the mining policy framework, which was done by the IGF. We do not have a real license to operate. The community was incompletely involved. We don't know about the working conditions of the Mauritanian factory. We do not have indicators what's going to happen and to which degree mining standards are being respected. As I said, environmental impact assessment is quite dubious. No closure plans. This is missing in the regulation. On-site social impact assessment, I said, is missing. And the distribution of benefits and income along the value chain is also unclear, as we do not know the details about the G and ESG. I'm finished. This is something food for thoughts for later. I like to thank you so much for your time and interest, and I hope we will find some time to discuss details here later.
Yes. Thank you. Right. Do we have immediate questions? And these don't need to be clarifying questions. These can be comments or suggestions or things that occurred to you while our three speakers were talking. And I think there's one common chain between all three, which is how access to information or data is a very important part of sustainability and mining. So whether we're talking about the Singalese case where they don't know what happened with the local communities because there's not information collected on environmental rights. Patrick started us off with just this question of where are mines located and what is the environmental footprint just around those mines. I can keep talking for 10 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. I would encourage you to throw in a question if there is one. All right, let me start one off. Patrick, there are you can pay S&P a whole load of money to get exactly what you guys are talking about, because I know from the investor side there's great interest in um, mine sites and environmental and social indicators. And S&P's models are very, very highly developed. So my question is, where do you fit in? And my second question is, can people misinterpret that as causation, which is a very different conversation? And how do we protect against that?
Do I have to press now? Probably I do. Okay, so perhaps two comments. I think the data science, how you integrate, has a huge impact on what comes out in terms of results. I mean, there's the obvious, you can do the obvious, you take some locations, you take a data set that's out there on biodiversity, you just glue them together and then you say, yeah, we have a new rating. But that may not be very clever. And what do you do exactly? That's what we try to research in our research project. So what data should you use? What scales are sensible? What granularities? What uncertainties do you have there? How do you integrate it? With what method? So there's just so many questions unanswered yet. How you should do that responsibly with all the caution you should, that there's a lot of demand in terms of research. But clearly, once we have viable products, we're very interested in talking to the industry and to see how they can take it up. The second point you raised is something we are very well aware of, and we are very careful not to use causation. So what we can show is collocation of a biodiversity risk or deforestation, and it just is the case that the mine is there. But is that causation? You just can't prove it by just looking at collocation. So we would not really be happy to call this causation. So.
Yes, please. We have a question at the back, and then I'll come back to. Can you just raise your voice and tell us who you are before you start?
I did the very last slide where you listed all the shortcomings and open questions we still have about social justice and all the other, let's say, sustainability issues around this mining. So I have my question, maybe I have two questions on that. First one is, would it not make sense maybe to look at this also knowing that before initiating this or at least at the same time? And second is how BGR is also trying to address this maybe in the future. So if the collaboration is going to go on maybe longer, also looking at these aspects, or what's the next step? I'm sure that it's not going to stop at this, but you're going to look also into these other important aspects.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for this question. The project started in 2016, and at that point in time, it was mainly focused really strictly on geoscientific support in terms of developing the capacity at the administration in terms of exploration. And that is the reason, maybe you know how the time span and planning periods in this international collaboration project, it's not so easy to really then totally turn around. No? And that is, I think, today, of course, that project would have been framed differently or more including those other aspects. Of course, there's no doubt. This is just, yeah, I totally agree on all points you said. And in the future, I'm not sure. This project is about to end, and I'm not sure whether there will be a follow-up project granted. We will see what's going to come. Yeah. However, of course, this is of course part of this capacity development at the administrators level. Of course, we won't talk only about geotechnical aspects there. No, the idea of socioeconomic impact assessment is always something that is being transported. However, the means are not there, and technology is not there, and the tools are not there, and yeah.
I know how important these aspects are in German, so I was wondering. I was sure that why you show that slide.
Thank you. I had a question. I have a question to Herman because I was interested by the fact that you mentioned among the barriers to the African mining vision the resource dependency factors. Because, for example, a project like Africa Maval is built on the resource dependency of Europe towards Africa, and for example, in the scientific literature, there is the stream of the resource course instead of the one of the resource dependency related to the South American and African countries which are rich of resources. So I would like to, if you can maybe tell us something more about it, and what do you mean by it?
Francesco, your question is perfectly valid and your insight is clear. What I meant with mentioning resource dependency in the context from the African perspective is that it drives policy debate in the African countries. Let's take a simple example. South Africa at the moment, there is massive resistance to the transition to a cleaner economy from organized labor involved in the coal mining industry, because there's over 500,000 people that are at risk or feel that they're at risk of losing their jobs. And with a dependency factor of like 10 to 1, you're talking about 5 million mouths unfed if those 500,000 people are not employed, or 4.5 then if my math doesn't fail me. So that's what I meant with including it there, is there are different perspectives on this resource dependency, and it entirely hinges on where you look at it from. Europe has a quite different perspective from Africa, and that resource dependency economically for the African countries drives the policy debate. And it's that reality of the social impact of these bigger impacts of mining that are likely to either realize in the form of resistance to accepting these opportunities, or other forms of adaptation.
We good? All right. So summing up from 3 presentations, we started with a very literally satellite view of the Earth and sort of saying, here's biodiversity and environmental governance and mindset, and there are complexities there, even just getting that information out. Then we sort of moved to the regional level between the EU and Africa's own ambitions. And I think the alignments were as interesting as the contradictions. So it's not smooth sailing, and there are enough complexities between that relationship. And we didn't even add on the BRICS countries just yet onto that. And then we move to a very specific local relationship, although cross-border. But again, there are complexities because you're looking at 2 countries, how they do business, how that value chain stays. And again, I found the question interesting, whereas you were talking about ESG. And I'm just wondering if this same presentation was being made in a different country, the question would be, can we invest in there? What's the profit margin like? Because it's a very different story depending on which part of the world you're looking at that value chain from. So interesting complexities. Could we do a quick round of applause for our 3 speakers, please? Right, let us move on to our next 3 set. I would love to invite Shungmi Li from Central South University in China, who's going to be talking about soaring of global copper demand, urges cohesive emission mitigation strategies from both demand and supply sides. I think that's going to be really interesting. I'm going to give back to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sean Mei Li, a PhD student from China, the Central South University and the City University of Hong Kong. And my presentation theme today is soaring corporate demand urges cohesive mitigation strategies from both demand and the supply side. Why it is urgent to decarbonize the global industry chain. Copper, it is a critical mineral. As we know, it has good conductivity and excellent ductility. On the background of clean energy transition, the copper demand is further stimulated from power generation, transmission, and consumption. Due to the extensive and ambitious deployment of these industries, as well as the intensive content of them, I conclude from the existing studies that the copper demand is most likely to increase 1.8 times and 2.8 times by 2030 and 2050, respectively. Additionally, the production process of copper, it has a high carbon intensity, which is among the top 3 of all the metals. Therefore, soaring copper demand as well as the carbon intensive supply make the decarbonization of global copper industry chain really urgent. Then we will talk about how can we figure out the optimal decarbonization pathway. This is the study scope of our research, starting from the mining and beneficiation stage of copper, ending with the recycling stage. And I divide the whole life cycle into demand side and supply side. For the demand side, I will figure out the copper demand in the emerging end uses at component level, as the picture shows. And from the demand side, supply side, and we specify 4 technological routine for smelting stage: the hydrometallurgy, micrometallurgy, and the pyrometallurgy are divided into reverberatory base and smelting and flash smelting technology. In terms of the methodology, we will use the life cycle assessment for the carbon intensity assessment and use the MFA for the copper demand and production volume assessment. Based on the historical analysis, we will use the scenario analysis for the projection. And we first will talk about the historical result for the global copper cycle from 1960 to 2022. There are different characters for different stages. I will select the key point of this figure. For the smelting stage, the hydrometallurgy routine only accounts for 13%, and the old pyrometallurgy technologies is iterated gradually as the share of the bath and the flash smelting is larger. And for the recycling stage, we can see that only 60% of the refined copper is from the urban mining. One of the reasons is 52% of the copper is dissipated. For the demand side use stage, we can see that the traditional end users are the primary copper demander, but there appears a soaring trend in copper demand of emerging end uses. Since we can see from the figure that the compound annual growth rate of PV wind power, especially the new energy vehicles, is really high, and the copper command share of these emerging end uses is also thriving, especially the new energy vehicle has become the main driver of the emerging copper demand. This figure indicates the cumulative carbon emission of the copper industry chain. According to the bubble size, we can see the mining and beneficiation stage and as well as the smelting stage dominate the carbon emission of the copper industry chain. And for the smelting stage, the modern metallurgical technology is greener, such as bath and flash smelting, but the carbon emission is greater. For the recycling stage, it has a minimal environmental burden. On the one hand, because the secondary supply has a smaller share, and on the other hand, we can see from the right figure that the carbon intensity of the secondary routine, that is a recycling routine, is much lower than the primary routine. Based on the historical analysis, we will talk about the projected copper demand and copper intensity. There are 2 scenarios for each parameter. The SSP2 is the middle road of the shared socio-economic pathways, which indicate that the the future trend won't deviate from the historical pattern. And the LED is the low energy demand. It is a pervasive transformation of demand side of resource systems, as well as the supply side implications. For the copper demand, we can see that the LED, under the LED scenarios, the copper demand is much lower than the SSP, but except that there will appear a higher peak during around 2025 to 2035. Yeah, for the technology evolution, there is also towards a circular direction compared to the SSP2, since we can see from this figure that the secondary copper production market share is much higher. And we can see also from the right figure, the lower copper intensity also indicates that the circularity is critical to reduce the carbon intensity. Based on the projected copper demand and carbon intensity, we combine the scenarios of parameter from demand and supply side, and finally define the 4 scenarios for the final projection. And there are 6 key parameters for our projections, and the first 4 are from the supply side, and the last 2 are from the demand side. And according to the projected cumulative carbon emission, only with the joint effect, the cumulative carbon emission will not exceed the GHG budget. And within the joint effect, the material efficiency improvement and greening electricity is the optimal decarbonization pathway. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, clarifying questions or thank you, Shangmi. Because the question that was delivering in my mind, you answered it with by your last slide, where it's the electricity mix, the source of energy for the entire copper cycle is what impacts its CO2 and GHG emissions. So thank you very much for that. It's also an interesting thing to keep in mind because copper is part of our entire green technologies, magnets, electric vehicles, and we never consider the cost of of copper itself when we're doing this. So thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Right. Can we now move on to Alejandra, who's going to be talking about seeing is believing, distrust and value control in Peru's artisanal and small-scale gold mining sector.
Okay. Hi. So first of all, apologies because I will cough during this presentation. It's not COVID. I'm just like with I have this issue right now with a cold. So I'm Alejandra. I'm a PhD student from Leuven and affiliated researcher at Universidad del Pacífico in Peru. And this is a project or a study I'm developing with Roy McConaughey from the University of Bath. And it's part of my PhD project where I see the barriers of responsible sourcing in artisanal and small-scale gold mining. And it's based on over 160 interviews comparing formal, informal, and illicit mining sites in both tunnel mining in the Andes and alluvial mining in the Amazon. So ASGM is the #1 source of anthropogenic mercury emissions. And in 2013, the Minamata Convention was signed by 133 parties. And part of this convention is that there's a commitment from these countries to reduce mercury emissions, that's including promoting the best available techniques. And among these best available techniques, usually we hear a lot about the so-called clean technologies. This is gold processing, mineral processing, especially without the use of mercury and sometimes cyanide. And among these technologies, the gold standard would be the gravimetric table, that it's the one that we're seeing in this picture, that separates ore from gold using water and oscillation movements. So miners don't use any chemicals in the process. And while they're very promising, they're still anecdotal. In the last 10 years, there's been plenty of studies from Vega, Spiegel, Hinton, seeing on why these miners don't want to buy these tables. And they say that it's a matter of effectiveness for miners. They do this cost-benefit analysis, and for them it's too costly, and also they need this technical knowledge. However, we're also looking at the role of trust in this cost-benefit analysis and how it shapes miners' perceptions on what the decision to upgrade towards clean technologies and what is clean technology. So ASGM in Peru represents around 10% of the formal gold trade or gold export. We are the #1 gold producer in South America. And since 2012, we've had a new legal framework to formalize mining that has come hand in hand also with the criminalization of mining in certain areas, particularly to avoid the expansion of ASGM in the Amazon rainforest. And part of this process was that Peru signed the Minamata Convention, and it introduced new legal instruments to control the flow of chemical supplies, but also a temporary ban on mercury. But even with these measures, we are one of the top countries where ASGM production is very high, while mercury imports are low, which doesn't make sense. So of course, mercury is coming from the black market. So now I will explain the 3 sources of distrust that we have found. First is that, yes, miners are aware that mercury brings low recovery of gold, around 50%. However, they have their production in around 2 hours. So this allows them to immediately recuperate their investment, and also pay their suppliers. And the health impacts are not immediate. They know it is possible, but you will see it in decades and decades. So we find here what Scott will call like knowledge, practical knowledge or METIS, where experience has shown them that mercury, while not effective as they wish for, it is reliable. And this comes hand in hand with the second source, that is the legitimacy of expert advice. Since the Minamata Convention, the state has done a lot of awareness campaigns for miners to know about the health impacts they have in their own health and in the communities and the environment. But because also it comes hand in hand with the criminalization of ASGM, they are not buying this type of campaigns anymore. So the first quote is from an illegal miner that is also a member of a native community, saying that she has drank mercury. Her brother has worked with it, the dad has worked with it, and nothing has happened. That now is 96 years old, he's still alive. So all of these things just show that the negative impacts of mercury is only said to demonize the activity. And the second quote is also from a formal miner ranting about the ex-minister of the environment and also the National Authority of Water, saying they collect all this data and they don't show anything in situ. It's more about around the surroundings, the mining sites, saying that this is just like a scapegoat for these environmental NGOs to cash money about the impacts of mercury. And the third one is about the avoidance of rig deals. And this one, we find it more in Andean mining, because here it is much more labor intensive. They need certain instruments to crush the ore and then separate it. And if you don't have the instruments, then you have to sell your ore to beneficiation plants. And miners are afraid of getting bad deals. So this is a quote from a representative of a development cooperation organization saying, "Seeing is believing, isn't it? No, miners want to see where their production goes. Even if they buy new machinery, they want to see what is happening. And everyone is afraid of getting a bad deal. No one trusts anyone." So what we see is that now in Andean areas that gold deposits are getting exhausted and they're getting more and more scarce. There is upscaling, but towards cyanide plants in very rural forms in places where they have worked with mercury. So now we have the combination of mercury and cyanide that is much more dangerous. However, this is not really that much discussed in around policymaking. So what we see is that there is a mismatch between the experts and miners' perceptions of what is clean technology. The exclusionary practices from the past have eroded trust towards the expert advice. Miners are interested on upgrading to cyanide plants, but it's not doesn't fit the state's agenda nor the international cooperation, and that familiarity outweighs the potential benefits of clean technologies as it provides minimum control of their production in a context of low confidence in the state authorities. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the statement that, oh, they didn't trust the minister, I was like, that's now groundbreaking research in any country. Right. Do we have questions, clarifying questions? No? It was a very comprehensive and clear presentation, and I look forward to having a discussion around it.
Okay.
Can I let her sit down? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And I would now like to invite our last speaker for the day, Francesco, who's going to be talking about a systematic literature review of strategic and operational ESG challenges in sustainability reporting of the mining industry through the lens of stakeholder theory. And you've got
It's okay,
7 minutes to do
okay.
it. 8, sorry.
Thank you very much. And I'm Francesco. I'm from Italy, from the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies, which is based in Pisa, in Tuscany. Okay, this is a repetition. So just a little bit of theoretical background from our research. We started from the point of view that sustainability literature in the mining industry is a very mature topic, and as well as it is in the mining industry, because ESG disclosure are now published by around 80% of the largest companies. So we decided to ask ourselves how this reporting of ESG challenging is made. Then we acknowledge that ESG disclosures are usually keen to become an important managerial choice for the survival of the mining firms, because the mining firm attach to this disclosure the search for legitimacy from their most salient stakeholders. Stakeholders have some expectations about sustainability, and mining firms try to respond to this expectation with their ESG disclosures. So having acknowledged that there are some deviation in these patterns, because these deviation are related to the fact that mining firms want to want to communicate something which is a little bit different from the reality, we decided to investigate which are these patterns of deviation, if they are systematic or not. And as a last step, we acknowledge the fact that there is a mismatch between the use of the instrument, which is a purposive use, and the instrument itself, which is the ESG reports, which, according to the GRI principle, which is the most common standard in the sector, should be comparable, should be accurate, should be reliable. So we decided to explore which are the risks that the company incur in using this neutral tool in such a way. We did it through systematic literature review. We started from more or less 1,000 papers, and then we screened them, having a final sample of 69 papers, mainly coming from the journals that are there, and published between more or less 2014 and 2022. As a first outcome, we were able to extract an ESG framework, which is categorization and systematization of ESG challenges in the mining sector, which is organized by layers, hierarchical layers. So there is the first one is pillars, the second one is categories of impacts, the third one is aspect of impacts, and then there is a fourth one which here is not displayed for clarity and space reasons,
But in totality, we are able to collect 270 different challenges with more or less 1,000 occurrences of them in our papers. So starting from this categorization, from this collection, we decided to explore how they have been reported in our body of papers. So we divided the evidences in the body of papers in two. The first one, which we call T1 papers, are based on sustainability reports, and we call them strategic outlook papers. And the second one are based on case studies and research developed on the ground, more or less, and we call them operational papers. So as you can see from a first look, we plotted the challenges of the previous framework on the two axes, so highlighting two different dimensions. On the Y, we have the scale of the issue, and there is the local, regional, or global scale issues. And on the X, we have the reporting level that this issue, the reporting level of the issues into the two different body of papers. And we can have absent, incomplete, or complete reported issues. So let's elaborate a little bit on them. The first implication that we were able to extract is the fact that ESG challenges, both when analyzed in the first body of paper, based on sustainability report, and through on-field investigation, are reported in a purposive way. And by purposive way, we mean that, for example, taking into consideration global challenges, we have that in the first body of papers, they are completely reported, while in the second body of papers, they are absent or incompletely reported. The opposite happens for local challenges, for example. So taking into consideration that we were analyzing the same settings, most of the times the same companies that were analyzed from different point of views, we can say that there are some omissions and some inclusions that depend not on the particular context, but on the choices of who is reporting. So as a second implication, we can say that this deviation from neutrality follows some systematic path, and these systematic paths are both of inclusion and both of omission. So the first path is quite clear. So in papers based on sustainability reports, we have a complete reporting of global challenges, but an incompletely or absent reporting of regional and local challenges, while the opposite happens for the other body of papers. As a third implication, we can say we introduce this so-called scale blindness factor, which is a bias that arises in reporting, and that leads the reporters to systematically neglect the issues that happens at a different scale from the reporting focus. And by it, we want to say that when the reporting focus is on global challenges because of the expectation of global stakeholders towards big mining companies, then the focus is all on global challenges, and everything which is related on other issue scales is completely neglected. The opposite happens for research conducted on the ground when global challenges are like taken apart and all the focus is on other factors. To conclude, we can say that this choice of mining companies to employ sustainability report in such a way creates a risk of delegitimization of the whole disclosure, because if the disclosure should be based on the completeness and accuracy principle of GRI, then using the disclosure in such a way becomes a threat to the whole firm reputation. And as a last step, we were able to conclude that this so-called scale blindness factor limits the ability of ESG reporting to address sustainability in a systemic way, and pose a threat to the whole instrument of the ESG report to be a clear mirror of the sustainability impacts of the mining industry. Thank you very much, and reach me if you want to.
Do we have any specific questions for the research that Francesco just presented? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Gabriel from the IGF. It's a really interesting presentation. And on the blind effect that you were mentioning, did you see some differences between the sustainability report at the global level, at the headquarter level, and sustainability report at the subsidiary level? I know some big mining companies publish both of these reports, one with aggregated results, so maybe with more larger scope and larger consideration, but also some report for subsidiary at country level. And did you see any difference in these two kinds of reporting by the same entity, or was it not included in the scope of your report?
So when I say sustainability reports, the main focus is on corporate level, because they are the most available, and sustainability report developed at a local level are really a niche, as I know, and usually the problem is exactly the fact that different local level impacts tend to be aggregated, and then in this aggregation the specificity of the different mining site tend to be lost. And in this way there is a disconnect between what is reported and what is the most important mining impacts, which everybody knows that are at the local level.
Cool. Do you want to come sit down so we can have a conversation? Right. We've had three very different kind of presentations. We've had one which is focusing very much on a very calculated side of copper and carbon efficiency. You've probably guessed by now, but engineering and technology is not my strong suit. So I keep confusing those points. But I was looking at your slides and you were talking about, we know copper demand is coming. We know for the green technologies, whether it's the European transition, it's Chinese transition, or the EU American transition, we know copper demand is coming, but nobody's really talking about the carbon footprint of this demand. And I think bringing that element in and how circularity can and cannot help with that, to what extent, is an important side of this. So we've had one presentation which talks about the very large demand that's coming in. Then we've had a second presentation by, where is she? There she is, about artisanal mining. And we know artisanal mining comes across in a number of other minerals as well. And although you talked about specifically mercury and cyanide, but the three principles are exactly the same. Even when you talk to people studying cobalt or coltan, for example, or talking about distrust in the any other production system than what they know, distrust in governance, as in government and why they're doing it, on expert advice. Oh, we can tell you a better way. And there's like, no, we're not going to do this. And the third bit was avoidance of, we want to see where our mineral is, just that level of distrust. So although those examples were coming from Peru and talking about gold, they're pretty true for almost any artisanal interaction that you're going to have. And the third thing was around distrust of companies and how we do not believe the sustainability report. I do not want to say we do not believe the sustainability reports of mining companies, but those of us who have read them often enough are going, oh God, how can you write all of that and not say anything in an entire level? Do we have questions on why we're not trusting certain pieces of information? So when even people are saying this is how you do it sustainably, why that question of trust or distrust is arising? Have people have experiences from their own sectors, their own countries that they want to share around these ideas? Or we can just go have coffee. I'm happy either ways. Okay, I'll start us off. Francisco, I come from the corporate world before I gave up the corporate world. One of the things that was very clear is when a mining company or even a smelting or a refining company is putting out a sustainability report, it is not for the common stakeholder. It is directed at a very specific set of audience, and it is addressing a very specific set of concerns. Secondly, it has to pass through the legal department, and the lawyers will shut down any information that opens the company up to any sort of investigation. And the third thing that comes in, is it materially important for the company to declare this? So the concept of materiality is very different for a company than it is for people who are writing academic pieces, from civil society, from that side. Do you think your research takes into account the focus of what a mining company is allowed to do? For example, I'll put it this way. Let's pretend I work for a certain Swiss copper mining company. I cannot put certain things into my sustainability report if they will lead to an investigation, which will cause a fluctuation in my share price, because I am then not committing my fiduciary duty to my shareholder to protect shareholder value. So how does your research take care of those things?
Yes, there are. Thank you for the question. It's very interesting, I think. Would like to mention 2 points. The first one is the fact that when a mining company is putting down a sustainability report, it uses a framework, an existing framework, which most of the time is the GRI framework, the Global Reporting Initiative framework. The Global Reporting Initiative frameworks has a lot of indicators, and there is also a specific mining section which has been published since 2005, if I remember well. So it's a very long tradition. We reviewed all the indicators of the GRI in order to compare with the challenges that I displayed in the ESG framework. And we were able to notice that all of the global challenges which are completely reported are, as a matter of fact, one of the indicators. So we question, but it is the problem of the framework. So it's the framework that is missing something. So we go out with the new framework and we became rich. Or but the answer was that the fact was that there are also these other indicators in this sustainability framework, but all of the companies are pointing towards only some of them. So it is not the problem of the tool, but is the problem of how the tool is used. The second point is related to the shareholder perspective. We, acknowledging this fact, we decided to use the stakeholder theory, which tries to adopt this more comprehensive perspective. So if you put the border of your system in the shareholder, for sure, the better option is definitely to avoid everything which goes against the economic value of the firm, the market returns, or wherever. If you try to open the borders of the system and include other stakeholders, maybe the optimization problem became a little bit more complicated.
Somebody like to add to that?
On that level, I found the presentation really interesting. What I'm wondering a bit is about the level of incomplete information at that intermediate level. So you said that at the global level, you find a lot of information in the sustainability reports, and at the very local level, you find a lot of information in the case studies. But there's this missing gap, basically, where you would probably locate the actions of national governments, for instance. So what I'm doing is I'm doing research at the moment where I look at the joining of mining companies to sustainability reporting initiatives, and then looking at whether they expand in given countries or not. And I was wondering, could you say something about the different motivations of these different kinds of scales to leave out information at that intermediate level? So why, I can imagine why a company would not give that much detail at this intermediate level in the sustainability report, but I am a bit puzzled why a case study would not sort of give me more information what the challenges are at this intermediate level.
So about the intermediate level, we call it regional level, but it's with region we point to our geographic region, and it's there are some mixed results because there was not such a clear trend. So there were some quite completely reported, some others quite overlooked. For example, at the regional level, there are some of the indicators which are related to the relationship between the company and the government, which are also mandatory to be disclosed. And maybe in the case of the case studies, the point is that really the focus is so much on the sites and the stakeholders interviewed or being surveyed are only at this level, so are really from the mining towns or the community of workers or the artisanal miners, and whatever is above maybe is not taken into consideration that much because of the abundancy and gravity of the impacts of the local side. But still, it's just a guess, I have to admit.
Tanze?
Masuma, my question is, I forgot your name,
Left
sorry.
hand.
Yeah. Well, it's actually more a statement that will transform into a question eventually. I found it quite interesting that the attitude of the artisanal miners towards the mercury and the cyanide it actually mirrors the thinking in Africa as well. Because currently there's a debate whether, as you said, we are aware that mercury is not good, you know, and then cyanide came up as a solution, and now we're realizing cyanide isn't all that. So what we're doing now is we have a big a WhatsApp group where we keep on asking questions. What is the alternative to the use of cyanide, you know, in gold production, or in the gold mining process? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what do you do in Peru to if you don't trust what has been given to us, and I'm putting this quite lightly, what is then the alternative to it? Or the alternative approach to it?
Thank you for your question. So I will take a couple of steps behind to talking about alternatives. First, I think we don't know still enough about mercury because these miners, you can see it, and I've seen more effects on jewelers than on miners. However, we don't trust what they're saying about the impact. And now we have new evidence. I'm quoting, for instance, the work of Jimena Diaz Leiva, seeing that actually it is true in the site, especially when you're doing very large mechanical, the impact is not immediate to the miners, it's more to the communities. And that's why they don't see it. However, it is not taken as true data. So in that sense, then what is an option? In the case of cyanide, cyanide is used in Peru for medium and large scale mining, and no one questions it. And you say like, okay, it's a matter if you have the ICME standard. So for like a responsible use of cyanide, then you control the possible impacts. And I would say, yes, it's true. Maybe it doesn't have the same emissions, and it doesn't mean that it's a wrong way to go from the technologies we have available and the investments we have available. However, it is a hard truth, at least in my country, because it goes against political elites and also international corporations saying, let's make this ASGM into medium and large scale miners through cyanidization, no? So in the case of alternatives, I would say it depends really on the type of mining and the place and the investment. But for instance, now there are some NGOs that also are very questioned, but saying actually those that are mechanized, even using mercury in very sensitive areas like the Amazon, it's a matter of just like organizing better production. Because part of the problem is that miners and they tell you like I will just wash it here, like I don't want to go to the other side. So just changing that mentality of like you okay, I know that you're still not licensed or whatnot, but let's organize so you can grow a little bit more effectiveness, because you are actually losing a lot of gold in the water when you're doing like this, could do a lot. So I would say like that. It depends on the investment, but I would not say like let's go against cyanide, because we don't know that much of other types. And I've seen it like in large scale mining also using it, and no one says anything. No, so yeah, that's what I would say. Hope it's not very polemic, but
Yeah. Alejandra, I have a couple of follow-up questions,
yes.
and I was thinking about this issue of trust and distrust.
Mhm.
Do you think it's a generational issue that the younger generation may be more willing to listen to expert advice on cyanide, or listen to saying, okay, here's a different technology for to use? So, is that a generational issue? And two, can technology do something about this? So, and by technology, I include TikTok videos and WhatsApp groups, which seem to be a major source of information for young people these days. And, do they trust that information more because it's coming to them through a
Ah,
phone?
definitely. I would say yes. I don't consider myself part of the TikTok group, but at least what I see is that yes, they continue being skeptical from this information. Uh, However, there is this power of organization towards through especially this social media, uh, towards just looking for let's say alternative help. No, so that can be like other types of investment and with everything that comes with it, but also on just trying to reach the people they want to reach, and I think that's very helpful. Yes.
Yes, we have a question in the back. Federico, can you just raise your voice a little bit? I'm slightly deaf and ages.
I presented a little bit ago. It's more on sustainable. Into legal frameworks. You mentioned about how some parts of the first are compulsory. Yeah, well, is it compulsory like there's like a legal framework to enforce it country by country or regional? And it's also to know if maybe that could also be a solution to making them report um, the, the right thing.
No, it's not a legal requirement. This kind of the sustainability reporting is definitely not is so-called they are so-called non-financial disclosure. So everything which is different from the mandatory financial disclosures. The only thing that is that to be listened on the market, but I don't know the details in that. I'm ignorant, I have to say. There is for large company, sustainability reports are becoming mandatory in this sense, and I think that there is not a mandatory framework to be followed. So the question here, the point here is that all of the firms tend to copy one from to another because of legitimacy reasons. So, for example, if the company X is using this one. The company X is very well known and legitimated. So let's use exactly the same framework. Let's disclose exactly the same information, and then we are okay with our stakeholders. This is more or less the fact.
Sorry, I can add a little bit to that, depending on what stock exchange you're registered at. So the New York Stock Exchange, the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Australian Stock Exchange, you'll have different reporting requirements, even the Joburg Stock Exchange. The second thing that comes in is whose money are you coming with? Who's got money in you? Your investor shareholders will have an impact on what you have to release. The GRI is the recommended standard. Now, there are two differences. The GRI has 400 questions that the firm can answer internally and keep internally and do a summary report, or it can release that information into the out there. The only other voluntary initiative that once you sign up is the EITI Supporting Company Initiative. So when you're signed up to it, there is a voluntary legal requirement to disclose what you have agreed to by becoming an official EITI supporting company. So disclosure will change depending on what stock exchange you're from, who your investor is. BHP, for example, one of the big majors, top 10, discloses a lot of information. Glencore, not so much. And they're both bigger. So, but as yet, apart from the EU non-financial directive that's about to come in, which will hit a number of companies above a certain size, there is as yet no legal requirement. But the legal department, the lawyers have a big say in what is disclosed. As you know, lawyers, since they'll have to fight all the legal cases that will come. On that cheerful note, the importance of lawyers in mining and sustainability.
Can
Yeah,
I add the
Francis, go
last
ahead.
point is, and this is very interesting because it arises the problem of comparability, because if okay, GRI is as she said, is the preferred and advised standard, but it's not the mandatory one. So everybody can treat sustainability reporting more or less as their lawyers or their managers want. So my focus is on manager, but is thank you for this new perspective. I will try to interview some lawyers as well.
Yeah, we think sustainability is fun until a bunch of lawyers and accountants get their hands on it. Trust me. But on that bright note, unless somebody has something much more cheerful to add, no. Right. Thank you, ladies and